Now, it's Megyn Kelly time, one of the biggest stars of US broadcasting and host of the must-listen podcast, The Megyn Kelly Show, joins us with her unique take on American news and culture. Coming up shortly, Megyn's take on the healthcare employees fired for refusing the vaccine in her beloved New Jersey. But first, Megyn, this week you called out another hypocritical liberal darling. There seems to be a lot of them around at the moment. This was tennis player Naomi Osaka for going on one heck of a media blitz, despite throwing a tantrum at the French Open, protesting that speaking to the press would damage her mental health. And Megyn, she's now blocked you for it, I believe.
Yeah, she's blocked me, and sort of her diehard liberal followers are angry, which is fine. I'm used to making people upset, Dan. But here's what happened with Naomi Osaka. People, I think, have forgotten the history here. She came out at the French Open and said, I don't like doing these press conferences. They're annoying. The media keep asking the same questions over and over, and it's not good for my mental health. Then her sister came out and expanded and said, when she says mental health, she doesn't mean depression. She's not depressed. She's talking about trying to keep negativity out of her head so she can play better. You know, she doesn't want to get these questions about how she's not good on clay. So they put their cards on the table. Then the blowback came. The other tennis players were like, why should she get special privileges, right? We all have to do it. We all go out there. It's part of the contract. You actually do get paid to do them. It's part of your deal. And, you know, toughen up. We all have to do it. It's not the most pleasant thing, but that's our gateway to the fans. Why do you think you made $55 million last year, Naomi? It's because the fans love you. How do they get to know you? Largely through the media. And she got criticized by the mental health community for using that term to describe what was clearly just an irritation at dealing with annoying press. And then guess what happened, Dan? Suddenly it was, I'm depressed and I have severe social anxiety in dealing with reporters. Well, that only came after the blowback. And okay, fine. If that had been that, we would have left it alone. But what happened then was suddenly the Japan Vogue came out with her on the cover. Time magazine, which was just shot. That was just this month. So it wasn't shot months ago, just came out featuring Naomi on the cover. Her Barbie came out and she started promoting it. Then she was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Then she released a Netflix documentary starring her, which she orchestrated. She wanted it done on herself, and on it goes. So look, I don't believe her second claims. I believe her first claims. She doesn't like talking to the press because they're annoying, which probably they are. But I went back and looked at the tennis conferences with her. They're fawning. I don't know what she's complaining about. They're fawning. So anyway, we're in a position here, as you guys are there, where certain people are not to be criticized, right? Naomi Osaka is 23. She's a woman. She's a woman of color. And now she's played the mental health card. And therefore, we're all supposed to say she's uncriticizable. You may not challenge the story. Well, guess what? I do. And that's not to diminish other people's mental health claims. It's to diminish her claim, given the history behind it. And I think I'm well within my rights to do that. We've heard crazy things over here like, what would a 50-year-old woman be doing criticizing a 23-year-old woman? She is the highest paid female athlete in the world. She's the #2 tennis star in all of women. And she's extremely powerful here. She's got a very large social media platform. And by the way, these same liberal critics had no problem going after Nick Sandmann, who was the kid from Covington, Burling, who was on the U.S. Supreme Court steps being mocked for an alleged sneer against a Native American, all of which was made up. This kid has recovered all this money in defamation claims against CNN and others. He's 16. They had no problem going after him. He's a private figure. She's a public figure. She's made herself a political activist. Black Lives Matter masks with different people's names on them all last year during the U.S. Open. She's fair game.
No, I hear you. I absolutely hear you, and I agree. I just want to stick with sport one moment, Megyn, because these Tokyo Olympics are turning into a farce. They are surrounded by so much COVID theatre. But I just wanted to know how it's going down stateside, because, of course, the Olympics are such a big deal in the US. The media deals and the broadcast deals around them are so significant. Is there any excitement about the Games in the USA?
Not that I have felt or heard about, Dan, I have to say. I mean, the American public wanted the Games to go forward. They did not want them to be canceled because of COVID fear. Some 58% said we should do it. I think Americans in general are like, let's get on with our lives, right? I heard your last segment too. So they want to see it go forward. But I think the biggest thing tamping down the enthusiasm is the politics. You know, when the U.S. women's team lost their first game, what I saw all over social media, instead of damn, darn, so disappointing, was good. They spent too much time on their social justice priorities and not enough time on the playing field. Now, I don't know whether that's true. I just saw the reaction as people who would normally be rooting for these women sort of smug in their loss because the affection for these athletes turned politicians has waned. And that's the risk as an athlete when you go political. Now, having looked at just the news reports on what's happening over in Tokyo, I feel like the media so far has taken the biggest hit because a bunch of them, including, I guess, from BBC Scotland, got caught on a plane with one guy who had COVID, and now they're all in lockdown inside of a hotel room for 14 days. They can't see anybody. They can't cover anything. The media can't walk from A to B. They have to get on some jam-packed buses, increasing their risk of catching COVID. So it doesn't seem like they got all the kinks worked out over there, but Americans want the games to go forward, and I'll tell you this, they don't want to see politics in the games.
I know it's been a nightmare, actually. We've got a Team GB athlete later in the show giving us an inside look into just how draconian it is in Tokyo for an athlete. No fun this year. They're barely allowed to move outside of their training regime. But
no spectators.
Unfortunately, no spectators either. But unfortunately, taking the knee has now been approved by the International Olympic Committee. We've already seen the Team GB women's football team take the knee before their game. So I think it's probably going to be the most politicised Olympics there is. And of course, because there are no crowds, there's no risk of booing or anything like that. I mean, I'm not saying that the Japanese would necessarily have booed anyway. That doesn't really go with their culture. But they can sort of do what they want, the athletes, because the IOC has dropped all of its rules.
And I mean, they do that at their peril. Let's see what happens. We've talked about this, but you know what happened to the NBA here in America when they got political and they started putting Black Lives Matter on the court and letting the guys wear social justice messaging on their jerseys? Ratings hit an all-time low. They had problems across the board, and we've seen that in other sports too. So proceed at your own peril, because without spectators and with this sort of lull going into the games, this sort of general dour attitude, they're already up against it. And what do they really want? I mean, NBC carries the ratings. I work there. They want ratings. NBC carries the games. They want numbers. And so if we continue to see athletes get political, like we saw with Gwen Berry and her Olympic tryout, people over here are going to turn it off.
Megyn, just quickly, update masks in schools in the US. I know folk like you campaigning really hard to stop this going on. Have you made progress?
Well, I mean, now some New York City parents have filed a lawsuit to stop the mask mandates in schools, saying this is just ridiculous. We don't need to do this at this point. And there was a very, I would say, hopeful, in-depth piece in New York Magazine, which is a left-leaning publication, but by a well-respected journalist, making a very, very persuasive case that this is not necessary. And indeed, it is abusive at this point. COVID was never a serious threat to children. We only masked them up because they might have contact with the elderly. Well, here we have had 90% of our senior citizens vaccinated. And by the way, of those who died from COVID over the past year, the 600,000 Americans, 80% of those were over the age of, they were senior citizens. They were, I think, over the age of 80. So the point is that the most affected population, the most likely to die or be hospitalized or face serious risk from COVID, have been vaccinated. And so the thing we were masking up children for, the risk of them having contact with a senior citizen, has effectively been dealt with because that at-risk population has been vaccinated, and the children are largely not in any sort of dangerous trouble from COVID. They're not dying from COVID in any sort of significant numbers. In fact, the data just came out that the flu is definitely more deadly to children than COVID is. More children died of drowning last year than died of COVID. More children died in car accidents. I could go on. And certainly of the flu. And we never masked up children to prevent the flu. So this doesn't make sense anymore. We did our part. Our kids did their part. And now we're having ongoing psychological issues, as reported by many people, from these ongoing masks and children not being able to see each other, special needs, not being able to read lips of their speech therapists or their teachers and so on. Skin infections, from the bacteria that the masks cause. It's no longer necessary, and we need to accept reality.
Megyn, this was not at all surprising, but a good expose of the 1619 Project founder Nicole Hannah-Jones. saying this week that Cuba is among the most equal countries in the Western Hemisphere. So should we really be listening to this woman when it comes to how American history should be taught?
I know. It's nice and equally awful. So sure, right. Why doesn't everyone subject themselves to totalitarian control where the police will interrupt your conversation in a cafe if you say anything bad or unflattering about your leader, where your money's not your own, where you get paid what the government thinks you ought to be paid and no more? Why don't we all go live like that? Because it's going to make Nikole Hannah-Jones feel happier about the state of equality in our country. That's really what she said. And she's said it repeatedly, so she must really mean it. Meanwhile, there's a whole article just recently about the plight of Black people in Cuba and how they're really suffering. And this is not some grand utopia of equality there. So she doesn't know what she's talking about on many levels, which is consistent with her work in the 1619 Project, which she and the New York Times have been quietly scrubbing of its most controversial pieces after historians on both sides of the political aisle have come out to say she doesn't know what she's talking about. It's non-factual, it's ahistorical, and I quote, it's dangerous. So Nikole Hannah-Jones and the Times can do what they want to do. I read misinformation in that paper every day, but teaching it in K through 12 schools is a different story. Her teachings, her thoughts on this project or anything on this subject belong nowhere near our children. And that is why I think that our federal government, which was just about, thanks to Biden, to offer grants to high schools that would teach this in their history classes, he just had to revoke that policy because they were flooded with comments from parents all across the United States saying, no way, no, this is where we draw the line. So they withdrew the program.
Now, Megyn, speaking of Biden, it was another catastrophic night for him during this town hall meeting on CNN. And obviously, CNN gave him very soft coverage, as you would probably expect. But even their own medical analyst, Dr. Leana Wen, had to correct Biden, saying his answers were disappointing and did not meet the challenging realities of what's happening on the ground. I actually thought he was answering questions as if it were a month ago. She said Biden's statements were incorrect and misleading, particularly when he claimed you cannot contract COVID-19 or the Delta variant if you are vaccinated. And as well as that, Megyn, there was a moment, and I know the media doesn't like talking about this, but we talk about it with you. There was a moment where Biden just seemed incredibly like he wasn't mentally all there. Take a look and I'll get you to react off the back.
And the question is whether or not we should be in a position where you why can't the experts say we know that this virus is in fact it's going to be or excuse me, we know why all the drugs approved are not temporarily approved, but permanently approved.
I mean, Megyn, come on.
Stop it.
Oh, and no one's talking about it. No one's talking about it, of course.
You're like, maybe he can still land it. You know, he's a U.S. president. In that respect, I am rooting for him. I want him to be able to spit out a sentence.
Well, he needs to.
You can do it. You can still land it. No. Look, the CNN medical analyst did have a point. As to your point, he said, you're not going to get COVID if you are vaccinated. Well, that's not true. That is not true. Your risk of dying or being hospitalized or facing severe illness is way, 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 way down. It's next to nothing. Typical Biden, you know, I guess he just short formed it. At another point, he said it better, where he said people who have been vaccinated are well protected by COVID. So a little all over the board on that. She was right to call him out. But it is true that if you've been vaccinated, you really don't have to worry about severe illness with COVID, which is why it's so crazy that the WHO is now saying, even if you've been double vaxxed, you have to wear a mask. In various pockets in LA and other cities now here in the United States are saying, even if you've been fully vaxxed, you're going to have to wear a mask inside. And then, Dan, they sit back and they say, why can't we get the people who won't get the vaccine to get the vaccine? Why can't we? And I tweeted out today, let me make something clear. The people who are not getting the vaccine are not afraid of COVID. If they were afraid of COVID, they would get it. So stop telling them they're going to die. They don't believe that. Stop telling them they're going to kill grandma. They know the stats that I just read you about the vaccinations amongst the seniors. You have to get to them in some other way. And I know you're vaccinated, so am I. Okay, so these are two vaccinated people talking about this. What other way could there be? Take away something they hate, maybe. Tell them no masks for you. If you get the vaccination, you don't have to wear masks.
Exactly.
Ever. Not on a plane, not on an airport, not on a bus. But the last thing you want to say is get the vaccine and continue social distancing, continue with your mask,
exactly.
Continue with the plexiglass, all the measures that you already hate. These guys are sitting back going, no.
Exactly.
No, right? So I think Biden was probably trying to, ramp up encouragement to people who won't get vaccinated that, here's life in the promised land. And I think, the World Health Organization, our own CDC, and several other states here are starting to just pretend that we are back in March of 2020. And
I
we're
know, it's
not.
mad. It's absolutely mad. I completely agree. And actually, just finally, Megyn, obviously you're in New Jersey today. And speaking of the groups of unvaccinated people, one of the largest healthcare systems in the state actually fired 6 senior staff members who failed to comply with the company's vaccine mandate. It's disturbing stuff, isn't it? But do companies have the right to do that in the US legally?
So I would say in the healthcare industry, I don't actually even have a problem with it. If you're going to go work for a healthcare company in a hospital, this is the way it goes. Like you're going to have to agree to the vaccinations, whether they're COVID or something else, and you may not like it. But I can actually understand the mandate in that setting. I think it's different when you expand it out to universities and so on. However, here in the States, we just had a challenge at Indiana University. A handful of students brought a challenge saying you shouldn't be able to mandate an experimental vaccine for young people who don't need it. The college students they're not at great risk from COVID, and they lost. The court said they can mandate the vaccines in the university setting for the sake of public health. And that's consistent with some of the other rulings we've seen over time, though not with experimental vaccines, with vaccines that were, around longer and more approved by the FDA, by the Supreme Court saying, yeah, it's okay to mandate them. So I think, even though I don't like the mandates, I think legally they're going to be upheld.
Fascinating stuff. Megyn Kelly, so good to speak to you. We will talk again next week. That's Megyn Kelly, host of the Megyn Kelly Show podcast.